DJ fade out. It's all on you, Inger. I'm getting my fire extinguisher and my bucket of water because I know how this session is gonna be. So it's on you.
Go get it right now. Get your boots too. Get everything ready. Get your uniform on. Good morning, ladies. How are you all? It is so good to see you here today, supporting Bond and supporting the Bond Academy for so many years, and in so many ways we are just grateful to have your allyship. So we're going to go ahead and get started and jump into our conversation. Just give you 1 minute to share who you are, what you do. I'm Inger Swimson. I am the founder of the Bond Project, and doing this work has been incredible, especially seeing how we are elevating our male educators of color, and particularly Black and Hispanic or Latinx males. This has been such a beautiful journey, and it's nice to have so many female allies who are part of this work and who are, a lot of times behind the scenes cheering things on, but we know that there's more work for us to do. So I'm going to start with Heather, because you're the first one there on my screen. Just tell us who you are and why you are an ally.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Heather Uhanic. My day job, I work in Montgomery County Public Schools with these amazing folks. I feel absolutely humbled to be here with all of them because they are all true inspirations in this work. My real job, I say, is I'm a coordinator of the Equity and Excellence in Education program at McDaniel College, which again is another space that I get to work with a lot of these wonderful people. In terms of being an ally, I feel like that is definitely my role as a white person in this work, is to center the needs and perspectives of people of color as best as I possibly can. And so anything I can do to support the work that Bond is doing, I'm here for that. And I'm so happy to be here with all you today.
All right, thank you. Portia, you're up next.
Good morning, everybody. I am Portia Vanderhorst. I'm an assistant principal at Stonegate Elementary School in Montgomery County. I am also a friend to all of these women on here, and I'm really excited to be in this space in friendship and in co-conspiratorship. I'm also one of the organizers of a wonderful group known as a Community of Colleagues, and we are MCPS employees who on our own time plan how we will interrupt racism within our school system and build joy with one another. Just a quick caveat, I am in my Sunday best because I'm at an event for a group of young people that starts right after this. It's an outdoor event. When I sat down on the bench, I saw a cicada. So if you see me jump up, it's because I caught the spirit or I'm running away from a cicada. All that to say, I'm really glad to be here with y'all today.
All right, well, we got a lot of spirit with this Bond Academy, so we're gonna count it as that. All right, Mary, you're next.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mary Hard. I am currently a consulting teacher with Montgomery County Public Schools, which means I support new teachers in their first year. I'm also teach some of the courses in the Equity and Excellence program with Heather. I am an ally, supporter, fan of Bond for many reasons, but I think the primary reason is that it's because this is where I learn, right? I think it's my role to listen, to support, to learn, particularly in my role as one that supports teachers. And if we want more teachers of color in the profession, which we definitely do, I need to listen to their perspectives, make sure that they're connected to groups that will support them. And Bond has been phenomenal in that role. So I'm just here as a fan to do whatever I can.
All right, thank you. And Vilma.
Good morning. My name is Vilma Nahara. I'm an assistant principal for Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm also one of the county coordinators for the Minority Scholars Program, and also one of the co-leaders of Poder Educators, which is a Latina educators group. Why I'm an ally? Because we have to be, and because we love children, and we just truly need to create spaces for folks of color to feel validated and heard, and then make the change for the better. So that's my why.
All right, so let me create the room for us. We are in our girlfriend space, and we are about to get into our spa mode. So we're really deep in conversation, ready for our manicure, pedicure, spas. We got our robes on. We are just chilling with each other. And you know how that conversation starts. We start with just, you know what? I've been thinking a lot about. And what I've been thinking a lot about is all of this data that we're starting to see back and forth about male educators of color, and how, you know, if we really paint the picture, it can feel for us very disheartening and very disappointing. So, especially when we see that most of the teachers who are teaching our students, especially our students of color, they're white females. And there is a long history to that we know. So what I want to know is, as we are looking at this work, and I got to make sure I'm looking at my question right. What's the blind spot that, well, first of all, why do you think that we're in this space that we're in? Why aren't we able to recruit more teachers of color? And then why do you think it's more difficult for us to get male educators of color interested in teaching?
I guess we don't raise our hands at the spa, right? We just.
No, we don't. We all just chime in and get it in.
Well, I'll just jump in with one thought. I feel like I can't answer the question about why males. I would defer to a male to ask why they feel that it is not a space for them. But I would like to say something about the unchanging data and statistics. I have a question. My dad always asks, who decides and who decides who decides? And I'd like to know if the data that we're seeing is from Black male researchers, Latina male researchers about males in the profession, about boys going through, from Asian Pacific Islander males and Native males who are educational researchers. So I think one reason the statistics remain unchanged is that we source our statistics from the same population that makes decisions for males of color that are not necessarily in their best interest. And so, not saying that that data doesn't have some relevance, because someone looked it up and found it, but I wonder what would happen if we got statistics from male researchers and males who live of color who live this experience, and what those statistics would tell us. And I think that could be a shift to changing conversations around statistics by sourcing the statistics from different sources. So that's just one thing that popped into mind. And I'm sure we could all drop in the chat at least one male, Black, Latino, Asian, Native, Pacific Islander, a male of color who has researched something, and it might say something totally different or give us a different lens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to build on that a little bit. So what do you think is the blind spot then that districts are missing? And I'll broaden it, not only for male educators of color, but female educators of color as well. What's the blind spot? What's missing?
Inger, it wouldn't be a spa day without stories, right? And so when I hear this question, I think of the story that community organizer Saul Alinsky tells about, and Paul Gorski uses this a lot in his training as well, about the problem with babies going down the river, and people are fishing babies out of the river, but then somebody walks away and they get mad at them because they're like, what are you doing? You need to help us. And they say, no, we need to figure out what's going on up the river. And I kind of feel like that's the blind spot in focusing on recruitment. Sometimes it's incredibly important, obviously, because it's a pipeline, right? That gets men of color to want to go into this profession. And I feel like we're not always intervening at the right part in the pipeline, because we are hiring males of color, but the attrition rate is not changing. And so we're getting people into the profession, but then they're getting dragged out or pushed out, really more likely out of the profession. And so to me, we need to go back up the river and see what's going on early on. I mean, and I'm talking about from kindergarten. We've all heard the local story of a kindergartner who was harassed by police officers. Of changing the conditions in the river so that we're not hemorrhaging males of color and females of color once we actually hire them. And to me, the problem is that the river, it's not the fish, it's the river. And the river's polluted with white supremacy. And at least in our district, we're not willing to confront that. We're not even willing to name it. And so we can keep getting people on boats and whatever goes down a river, but if we're not going to change the river, then nothing's going to change. So to me, that's the blind spot.
Yeah, and I like that analogy of the river being white supremacy. So Velma, how would you suggest, what blind spots might be present that we could, tell, the next superintendent of a district to say, this is how you might be able to recruit more Latinas into this profession?
I think we definitely do operate in whiteness, and I think we recruit in whiteness, and we try to retain in whiteness. And I think for recruitment purposes, and I know some of
I get my thumbs up or whatever, but I don't even know what reaction thing, but thumbs up, okay.
But like, if we don't know that, right, we can't even move forward. And so if you're going to reach out to a community, different communities within the United States, it's to learn that community and meet them where they are. So if you're recruiting a community-centered, a family-centered person, and if we're going to Puerto Rico, Texas, Florida, and you're asking me, first generation Latina, to leave my home and move to Maryland and to come to work here, like, that's a sit down with La Familia and mom. I couldn't even move out to go to college. Like, going to a dorm was not even an option. But having that lens and that perspective, it's like, what we're doing now isn't working. So do it different and learn how to do it differently.
Absolutely. And part of it is that we, I think, are not willing to sit down and have a conversation with the people who are staying to say, what keeps you here? How did you get here? What keeps you here? And how might you help us create a space where more people will feel comfortable? Because like you said, it's not just about the recruitment piece, because we can possibly get people here, but they're not going to want to stay, especially if we got a river of white supremacy and we're recruiting in from whiteness and all of those other things. So absolutely.
Can I add one?
Absolutely, sure.
Thank you. So one piece I wanted to say is I don't know that it's a blind spot, because I think enough people have shared this for those in charge to not be blind to it. But a couple of things that I've just seen in my experience from the hiring piece is around interview panels, interview questions. So without the intentionality around who's on the interview panel, and without clear focuses on equity and how teachers will be supported once they're here. And even I have stories of administrators, when the panel or when the interviewee asked about equity work, they were told, oh, we don't really do that here. So that's not a blind spot, that's a choice. And then on the retention side, as everyone has said, we are steeped in whiteness. I think about my role and how we, reward and reinforce whiteness often, and don't create the spaces that are safe for teachers of color. I just listened to the panel with the first year teachers, and they talked about isolation. They talked about not being able to be their authentic selves. They talked about seeing their students of color being harmed and having to push back against that daily. And that's a lot of stress and pressure. So what are we really doing to change those, to change that situation, to change the atmosphere, to change really what's happening on a day-to-day basis is important.
Yeah, because you know what we see lots of times is the performative stuff. We see a lot of, yes, we're doing race and equity work with, different organizations, and yes, we want this to happen. So how do we help people understand the difference between the performative and the productive, especially when we're talking about these activities and these events that might help us build more opportunities for people of color to enter different school districts? Portia, you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. So I think it connects to the first one. So I'm keep thinking about the statistics. So the statistics we're hearing about where males of color are, I'm guessing in public school education, there are males of color educators somewhere thriving somewhere because of some reason. And often we don't go to those sources because we'll say it as MCPS, we are so confident in everything that we have. There are many people who are looking outside of MCPS for best practices. But as a system, we are very, what's that word, silo? We use that word a lot, siloed. So there are males of color thriving at different educational institutions where there are leaders, where there's teachers. I think one way to diversify that is for us to go collect some more information. What's happening over at this school where there's a lot of men of color? Why are they staying? What do they love about being there? How are they contributing? What of that do we have in our spaces? What of that do we not have in our spaces? And not what can we add to our spaces, but what in MCPS can we get rid of and replace with something that is actually functioning for the group of people to whom we're seeking to attract. And so I would say there is data. And as I'm talking to y'all, I'm talking to myself. How do we figure out at my school what can help and keep men of color? I need to go look where they are, why they're staying, and use some of that data as well. But I think a lot of times that takes extra time, that takes extra work. And we do so much of piling things on. That's why I'm a proponent for taking something off the plate before you're adding something to the plate. Because usually the things we have on there, if they're not satiating, why are we continuing to dine on them? Let's take it off and replace it with something that's going to meet the need. And so I think that is one way. Let's see where it is working. It is happening. Let's use some of our resources to see where it is working and bring it home.
And you captured the Bond playbook from the beginning. That's exactly what we did. We got focus groups together, veteran teachers and new teachers, and said, what keeps you here? What would make you leave? And how do we provide supports for you? So thank you so much for that. Heather, how are you seeing the difference between what organizations and entities are doing that are performative versus productive? Any additional thoughts on that?
Well, I saw my partner, Dr. Elena Murray, pop in, and I think that for me as a white person in this work, performative happens when people who look like me center ourselves, when we don't deliberately try to take up less space to center voices that are not traditionally heard. When we don't, like Vilma makes a great point about, communities. We are here to serve communities, but how do we stand aside and make ways to authentically involve communities in this work? And it goes to what you said, Portia, like it's working in places. Why aren't we elevating those spaces, those voices, those perspectives in this work? And to me, when you're not doing that, that's when it's performative, because you're trying to say me, my ideas, my way, I want credit, I want to get an award from the superintendent, I want to look good on Twitter. And so if you're authentically partnering with people in these communities, for somebody that looks like me, you might not even know that I'm doing it, because I want them to be out in front in the spotlight, and I don't want to be seen in that role, really, because it's not about me. Everything about the system centers people who look like me and Mary. And so to me, we have to do the good work behind the scenes, in private conversations, in stepping aside, in recommending people for positions, or to anything, to decenter ourselves. I don't know if you feel that way, Mary, but to me, like, that's when I know I'm not doing it
performative when I'm not in the equation. I'm just trying to do good work based on what Vilma tells me, based on what Porsche tells me.
And to add on to what both you and Porsche said, it's then we have voice data, right? Like we have teachers that are willing to speak, but then my job then is to make sure that's listened to. So that's a piece of it, right? So, which isn't always easy. I interviewed a bunch of teachers of color last summer to get their perspective on the impact of the CT team. And so then my role is then to push their voice forward, right? This is the truth of how our impact, what are we going to do about it? The pushback as well, that's not a very big sample size, right? So it's not only going to get the data, but then it's like really pushing to get people empowered to listen to the data and make the changes necessary.
Yeah, so Vilma, I'm going to throw a different.
Oh,
Go ahead, Porsche.
just really quick. I feel like the compilation, Mary, you said a word for me that is the pivotal word. That's the tipping point between performative and the authentic. It's truth, and that's the nexus. If brave enough to listen to the truth of the 7 voices you collected, or not brave enough to find a reason to dismiss the truth of that. And that is when reputation is if character is not what you stand for, your reputation is what you fall for, and that's where truth is not elevated. That's where performative, I think, practice is really not elevated and not accepted on purpose.
Thank you. I'm going to toss this next question to you, Vilma, to start us off, because I know that, you know, the organization that you all are working on is doing incredible work, minority scholars, all of those other things. But, you know, there's some intersectionality with all of that. We're women, you know, we're trying to navigate being a woman in this space and who we are racially, and being allies to a group that is really focused on men. So how do we demonstrate, since we're talking about the productive and authentic, how do we demonstrate genuine support to an organization that is really targeting and focusing on male educators of color?
My approach, one, is to support, right, the cause, and everyone is fighting the fight, and we got each other's back, and I respect the work and we all respect each other. But a lot of it is me learning and me listening and knowing when to not speak, knowing when to step back, allowing for spaces to exist without me in it, but also then advocating for those needs, right? So if in my school building or in my space, I see a need for Black males, Latino males, I'm going to create it because I heard it's needed and I know it's needed. So there it is, and you have it. And that's for teachers, educators, and also for students, right? Like if my kids need a space to be them, then I'll do that. And I think that's how I do it as a Latina. Like I know my place, I know when I can say, and I know when I can speak up on behalf of students and educators, but I also know when to step back.
Yeah, and you know, in being that ally, it is recognizing, you know, that this is a space that we're trying to create for men. So Mary, what might you add to that? What might you add to that whole intersection of allyship, but giving way to men being able to support an organization that is supporting male educators of color?
I think it's really approaching this without a scarcity model, right? So I do have moments when I'm like, but what about Black girls? All right, well, what about my Latina teachers? But then I remember, wait, it's not an either or, right? White supremacy wants us to think it's an either or, right? That we can only do we got to choose. We can only do for one group. And usually it's going to be the white group. That's no, right? So I can advocate for Black boys, I can advocate for Black men, I can advocate for Latinas, I can advocate for my Black girls and Black women, right? We can push for all of it. Why not ask for all of it? So I think that's the framework I keep trying to come back to when I have those moments of like, oh, what about, right? That's white supremacy working on me.
Portia, I see you nodding. I see you nodding.
No, I'm just
Anything to add?
agreeing. Sure, I agree with all of that. Y'all, my well-being is intricately linked to the well-being of my men and boys of color. I'm very conscious of that because I feel that, at the onset, when enslavement began, one of the intentional strategies was to do a separation of the family, to emasculate men, to commodify and objectify women. There was an intentional severing of what was our connection and our bond. And I think that only by an intentional rejoining of that can we all become who we're supposed to be in our well-being. So riding for them is riding for myself, right? Loving on these boys and men of color and supporting and tweeting and posting. I ask every Black male of color that I come across individually, have you heard of Bond? I send, the bondmen are probably annoyed. I send so many emails and copy them on them. Want to introduce you to someone I met? One person said to me, Portia, I'm already in Bond. I said, oh, my bad. I thought I reconnected you for a third time. But the thing is, that is an intention that I have because I don't want anyone to feel like there's not a place for them because there is a place for them. But if they are well, then what they are able to do to support us is even bolstered. And then I think also showing up means valuing their genius and intellect. I call them and I ask questions when I'm trying to process things and we push back on each other. We have healthy debate. I try not to just go to my girlfriends who are most readily at my group chat for things. I reach out to the men of color and the educator of colors in my life to help inform my perspectives and my approaches. And then lastly, with my students, at the very least, I always, when I'm interacting with them, I make it clear that I also see them as the young boy of color that they are. So when I have to call a young man out to speak to him in the hallway and he walks out with his head down, I said, Miss Vanderhorst is not talking to you to hurt you. You are a young man. You are a beautiful Black king. Please. And one boy said, I'm actually a prince. And I said, oh, okay, well then you are a prince, because I guess he was thinking about a king is older. I said, but you lift your head. I said, you have so much. And I use that language explicitly because I want them to know that I see it. So, and that it's valuable and meaningful in how I interact with them. So those are some of the intentional things I do, but I can't be well if they're not well. I can't thrive. I can't make the money I'm supposed to make. I can't get in the places I'm supposed to be if they're not in those spaces. And so that is why I want to be an ally. And lastly, when Bond first began, I asked Kim Bishop, who was one of, when he was in the county, I said, does Bond need any ushers? I would love to come and pass out programs and he said, Portia, what are your intentions? I said, to support, to be an ally. And he never let me come pass out programs. But the idea, I was willing to put my hands and my heart where my mouth is. So I'm thankful for Bond, and I'll do anything to make sure that it survives.
Yeah, it reminds me of book, and the book that Tavis Smiley wrote years ago. And he said, if we can get things right for Black boys in education, then we can get things right for anyone in education. So if we can get things right for Black males in education, then we can get things right for any teacher in education. So I want to throw this one at you, Heather. I've been reading, so you want to talk about race, and have really been enjoying that. And so Ijeoma Olu says that the possibilities of where you can leverage your privilege to make real measurable change toward a better world are endless. How do you utilize your privilege to improve what MCPS or your district is doing?
Honestly, Inger, that's a question I ask myself every day, because I feel like I can't go to sleep at night unless I can name something I've done. And that's just for myself, to hold myself accountable. and kind of connected to what I was saying earlier about like working behind the scenes, I really feel like my work is challenging people who look like me, right? So having conversations that I wouldn't have had in the past, like I would have heard something and said, oh, that was not the right thing to say. But then having a follow-up conversation with that person and saying, maybe, that didn't sit so right with me. Or can we talk about that a little further? And just trying to pull in as many white folks as possible to have those conversations with me, so they're not venting their guilt and their shame and their fear onto people of color who are already dealing with so much. We need to work as white allies, and I think the term allies can be a little problematic, but we need to work as white co-conspirators to call each other in, right? And in Portia's group, we talk about calling in the cousins. Like we need to do that work with each other. Joe Truss was here yesterday, right? And so he talked about, and I was like, oh, I hope this wasn't at Bond. I doubt it was at Bond. But on Twitter yesterday, he talks about this guy, Rob, who came to his session about being a white ally and was basically heckling him. And he was like, white folks, if you want to know how to be an ally, you got to take on Rob, because Rob is heckling me. You need to handle the Robs. And I was like, yeah, that's my work. I need to handle the Robs and the Karens, quite literally in some cases, and talk to them behind the scenes so that, we can deal with our own, so that they are not getting in the way of the amazing work being done by everybody else on this call.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's the Robs, it's the Karens, it's a lot of people. And sometimes it's the challenge, of course, is holding people accountable. So Vilma, what are your ways of holding people accountable around all of this? Because we know this stuff gets tiring. It's like, I'm tired of holding no, Rob, not you, Rob. We get tired of holding so many people accountable and trying to create this, this understanding. We know that the work is never ending. We know that it's exhausting, but how do we keep holding people accountable? And especially when we're tired of holding people accountable, we just want you to do the right thing. And basically, sometimes it feels like, I just need for you to do the right thing, stop tripping, you know what you're doing, get it together. But we can't always say that.
I have to be persistent in the work and relentless, right? And I have a way of asking questions that challenge folks and make them reflect on practices. And other times you just have to be like, there's no Black males in this classroom. Like, why are all the Black males teaching the lower level class? Like, you just ask the questions, right? And that's how I hold folks accountable. It's like, what this looks like, right? Like, I'm just saying, I was like, perception, optics, whatever you want to call it, but it is that. It is, I have to do that, because if I don't, nothing changes. So it's just the constant questioning. And as an administrator, I have some influence and impact I can possibly have, and that's what I do. It is that, and it is tiring sometimes. And it's like, really, again, it's the same thing over and over again. But it's that you got to be persistent. You got to ask the questions. You got to challenge folks. You got to make them feel uncomfortable. Sometimes the push and the pull, and sometimes, you got to just, it's okay to not be liked and to be that person at the meeting all the time. And in my opinion, then fix it, and we won't have to be in this weird space. There'll be no tension at the meeting if things were addressed. So that's my way of accountability. I would like to think that kids are better served, and our teachers of color, our Black males, our Hispanic males, and in my reach are slightly heard and better served.
Yeah, thank you. So Mary, you work with teachers who are new to your district. How do you help them understand And how do you help them become teachers who will hold others accountable?
I think the first piece in all of this is for me to, like, every day reflect on my own biases, reflect on my own, I don't know, draw out a white supremacy culture. So really getting really clear about that. The other thing is that from our first meeting with my teachers, I let them know we're going to talk about race, we're going to talk about equity, I'm going to be observing for signs of bias, and we're going to have those conversations, and it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes, but we're both here to serve kids. So really setting that framework so it's not a surprise. And then as people put in the chat and Vilma said, asking questions. So I take intentional data with all my teachers, but particularly with my white teachers who are serving our students. And when I go in with that intentional lens, I can see the subtle things, and then we can have the conversations. And sometimes there's tears, sometimes there's discomfort, but in my experience, for the teachers that are going to stick with us or that should stick with us, they're grateful, right? They're grateful for having their vision expanded because they want to serve their kids, right? I know in my career, I know I've done damage to kids, not intentionally, right? But I wanted to do better, and as I know better, I do better, and I really believe that for my teachers as well. For my teachers of color, it's a different conversation. Yes, we're going to talk about race, but I hope that I'm creating the space where they can come to me and say, either what you said to me wasn't okay because of XYZ, or here's why I made this choice. You need to understand that. Or I'm struggling on my team, right? I'm calling out this practice. I think it's harmful, but they're dismissing me. How can you have my back? So I think the conversations I have are different depending on my teachers, but I'm going to circle back. Again, ultimately, it comes back to me reflecting on my own beliefs, especially as I'm giving feedback, right? Am I looking for what I'm comfortable with? Am I looking for what's normed in my view? Or am I really looking at the students and what's the impact on students? Yeah, I mean, I think that's my guiding light there, which allows me to have the harder conversations when it's necessary, because it's about the kids.
So one of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier is that, you know, a lot of this has to do with how things have always been done. So it's interrupting those racialized practices. And that's the biggest challenge I see, is how we interrupt those practices with intentionality and with sustainability. When most school districts have pretty consistent change, how do we maintain the sustainability that we need to be able to interrupt these practices when, as I said, most, I won't even say most school districts, most organizations are oftentimes in a constant cycle of change. So how do we maintain that sustainability and be able to interrupt when we don't even know what the next change is going to be? I'm gonna let that sit for anybody who wants to reach that one first.
I can maybe speak from what we're trying to do. A group of us within a community of colleagues. One of our colleagues, Patricia Seidler, has been leading us through some critical learning around teachers as policymakers. And it's literally, what do you do when you sit in a place where you don't necessarily affect policy, but you sure need that policy to change so that things can be effective? And so we've been trying it on our own when it comes to certain things that bring us concerns. And so I think one way that we can create some continuity even with change is speaking about policy. So currently in our district, the language on anti-racism and racism is being updated in our school district's anti-discrimination policy. And the equity team is doing a great job in pushing for that language to, number one, be in there on the board, and then being intentional that the language is what the language should be. And that has been in collaboration with lots of people who don't do anything that on that level with policy, but people who have said, hey, I know you all are working on this. Can I offer some input, some insight? I see that this is about to be in the board policy, which is going to affect board decision. Could I offer my perspectives? And they have said, yes, please do. We'd like to hear. And so I think that when people exercise their love and their right to speak about things and ask people who are in decision-making places, could you consider this for the change? That's when things can become sustainable. So now we believe that things will be written correctly in a policy document. So whoever leaves or stays, that document will remain and should be the guiding light, because those decision makers have been willing to hear those perspectives. So I think that's one thing that can happen, is we can ask questions about existing policy. Like, whoever's not there, how will this thing, we can ask, I see this position is being moved. Where will the support continue to be for males of color if this is not there? Like, we can ask those specific questions like Vilma was saying, even if we're not in the decision-making spaces. And I think that's maybe a misnomer. We need to just because you don't make the decision doesn't mean you can't ask questions about the decision and reach out to those who do make the decision. And when that is done with love and in mass, things can change and remain stable even in the midst of change.
And Portia, that phrase, you didn't say it specifically, but you said a phrase that has really changed the way I think about things. You always talk about how can we hold the system lovingly accountable. And that phrasing to me, it has been life-changing, because it combines those two ideas that you think are separate. And like you said, Daryl, that either or white supremacy culture. No, it's both and. If you love the system, if you love your kid, you don't love the system, but you love the idea of education and it as a vehicle for change and opportunity for kids, then it's your responsibility to hold the system accountable for living up to those ideals and the ideals of the people that comprise the system. And so that idea of holding the spaces that we work in our organizations lovingly accountable is really important in this work. And I think, Portia, you've said this to me before, and I definitely, I heard this from Dr. Muhammad Khalifa, who wrote Culturally Responsive School Leadership. You are not going to get fired. Like, it is incredibly hard to get fired. And so what do you have to lose from asking questions, from pushing back, from holding the system lovingly accountable? Really, probably nothing in a lot of ways. Like, if you're not worried about your reputation and you're not trying to center yourself, then, and if you have privilege in ways, we have gender privilege in our system, everybody on this panel to a certain extent because of the demographics of the system, then we need to spend that privilege to hold the system lovingly accountable. So thank you, Portia, for pushing my thinking around that concept. And that keeps me hopeful, because it doesn't matter then what the system is and the pieces and the players and the org chart. It's about, does it live up to the values that we believe education, what it should be for the kids that are being least served? And how can we make it closer to that, regardless of the players and the org and that kind of piece?
All right. So as we're coming up to 12 o'clock, I think, as allies, what do you see missing that we could hold a district lovingly accountable for as it relates to the work that we're doing to support male educators of color as allies? What lovingly accountable thing can we say, if we did X, this is how we would be able to make a difference? And Vilma, I'm going to start with you.
And I think I heard this yesterday in one of the workshops, so forgive me, I went to 3, so I don't remember which one was which. But I think as a district, if you truly ask what the experiences are like as Black men in your institution and truly listened, right, and heard that story, I think that's step one. And it's worked for students. When you ask for student voice, and we're asking what their experiences are, right? And a lot of it is centered on students, but a lot of times men of color, no one asks how they're doing. No one asks how you're doing, Inger. No one, like, what are you feeling in this white space? What are you feeling in this white system? And to hear that and then to act on it. And I think that's the one thing this district doesn't truly have. They have an idea, but even with the current audit, like, where's that voice? Where are the folks of color answers in this audit? And how do we separate that from everybody else's voice? So that piece is to ask what the experience is and then adjust.
All right. Coming to you, Mary, what would you say? Thank you, Vilma.
That's a big question, because I think I could write a list, but I'm just going to go from my frame of reference. You know, my position, we are particularly blessed to be in classrooms a lot, right? So normally an administrator can go do an observation maybe a couple times a year. As TTs, we're in there every week, every other week. So I think I need more time to really form this, but really it's what I've been trying to do, right? That we are held accountable as observers and supporters for intentionally observing for equity, intentionally coaching for equity, and intentionally examining the practices, the always done, this is how we do it, processes and standards of the team to make sure that we are truly supporting our teachers of color. It's work that I've started since the first year I was on the team that I hope to keep pushing, but and there's support, but we need like that true dedicated support of like, yes, everybody is aligned. This is what we're going to do, no matter how painful, and this is how we're going to get it done. And that means the union, and that means the county, and that means the team all coming together to say, this is our purpose, and this is how we're going to make this happen.
Thank you. Heather, and then Portia, you'll have the last word on that question.
For me, and I would put this behind what Vilma said, because I think asking the people that are most marginalized by the system what's working or what could work better for them is the single most important thing we can do. I would say it's the fish water analogy again, naming white supremacy culture and how it continues to infest everything school systems do. It's not just Montgomery County. Is so important. It gives us language to talk about what's going on, the culture that is impacting our policies, our practices, our internal beliefs, all of that. I just think that theory, that framework is so important. It's historical. It's been baked into everything. We have to acknowledge that.
Is it my turn? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna take just two quick angles. In the structural, I would say, building off of Mary, holding the professional growth system expectations all the way to the top, with evidence that people are being held accountable on every level for active and intentional equity, anti-racism, and that when they are not meeting standard in that area, whether a director, an associate, a chief, and a superintendent, that there is a plan of support put in place, just like for teachers, that they are now meeting standard in coaching principals as being associates in coaching those, that they are being held accountable to that. And I am unaware of the evidence of how that transpires all the way through the org chart. And until that happens, we're gonna get what we're gonna get. That is one thing that I know is missing. The second thing I would say is missing is an intentional use of language. And I use this language to Mary and everybody else. I just heard you say what made me think of it, about no matter how uncomfortable things may be, that I'm learning this because I use that language with my staff sometimes. I know this might be uncomfortable, So now I'm centering how you feel about it instead of saying this learning is going to be so healing and restorative for the students and families who are on the other side of us. Or not discomfort, but rather how will we use this learning to uplift? And I think when we talk about this work from a, you might be in pain for a bit versus this is going to enrich the life and experience of someone else, that does something different to how people engage. And that's something that I need to even work on in my language as I talk about it. So I would say that PGS, Professional Growth System Standards, and the support and the cycle, and if you need to be evaluated out in the process because you are no longer, you're not able to meet that full, or that you are restored. And then also our language of how we talk about this work. Because I never want a student to come up to me and say, well, did you even try, Ms. Vanderhorst? And I said, no, it caused somebody too much pain and I don't want to make them too uncomfortable. They're like, so you were cool with me being uncomfortable in the process? So if I even change it, the focus, language, and that PGS structure, that's something to me.
Wow. Thank you, ladies, so much. This has been a wonderful spa day. You know, they're about to call us back so we can each go to get our manicures, pedicures, do everything that we need to do. And this was just what a spa day should be. It was rejuvenating. It was refreshing. It was honest. It was an opportunity for us to kind of love up on each other and to share what's on our hearts and on our minds. So thank you all so very much for your time today. Always impressed with everything that you all do. So thank you so much.